Hey, early on this week, I made a number of videos accusing the Oakland Raiders of being racist in their action of firing Ken Norton Jr. as defensive coordinator. And a friend of mine, Steve Barner, asked on Facebook why I would accuse the Raiders of being racist when they have a past where they've taken actions that shows, in his view, that they're not. And my reaction is, first of all, to express some shock that the Raiders, from his point of view, would be thought of as having a pass in present day because the actions of past administrations, when the great owner Al Davis was alive, were not racist. The Raiders were sexist in that they elevated Amy Trask to be the first female CEO, Art Shell as head coach of the Raiders, black, Tom Flores, first Latino coach of the Raiders, and Shell being the first black head coach in the NFL because of the Raiders and Al Davis hiring him, and so on and so on and so on. But today, we see a different Raider organization, and my assertion is that Ken Norton Jr. was brought in and set up to fail. I use the term last hired, first fired. It took the Raiders a long time to find a defensive coordinator. The defensive coordinator candidates that they interviewed were all white. They hadn't, when they talked to Todd Bowles, it wasn't who was a defensive specialist, who's now the head coach of the Jets. It wasn't for the DC position, it was for head coach. And by the Raiders' own admission, part of the Rooney Rule requirement where you're supposed to talk to minority head coaches or head coaching candidates in the NFL before making a decision. So Norton Jr., friend of Del Rio, was brought in by the admission of both Norton Jr. and Del Rio to be groomed for the position of defensive coordinator as he was doing it. And it gives Del Rio the perfect foil. Del Rio can say, and also, frankly speaking, avoid paying attention hands-on to the improvement of the defense, let Norton Jr. take the heat off him, which also plays into the racist idea that some people have that blacks aren't ready for management, yada, yada, yada. Because you have people, right, even in the wake of our first African-American president, Barack Obama, and very successful at that, you have people who don't want to see that because because racism is a mental illness and it screws up their ability to see clearly. That's just a fact. So here we are today where Ken Norton Jr. is placed in this position, groomed for it. The defense hasn't performed well for reasons we've talked about on this program having to do with leverage, but also Norton Jr. does not have control over the final roster on defense. That's Del Rio. So a lot of people have said, well, why did Norton Jr. make this call? I have this defensive back covering this. The person that makes that decision before the start of the game, that rubber stamps it, is Del Rio. And you can't have a situation where you have Jack Del Rio, John Pagano, and Ken Norton Jr. recorded as sharing defensive responsibilities, but then Ken Norton Jr. takes the heat for it and gets fired. And because of the pattern of hiring of coaches in the NFL, which is that if you're white and you're a defensive coordinator, chances are you're going to land someplace else as a defensive coordinator, but that's not true if you're black. Because of that racist dynamic, Norton Jr. is thrown out into the cold with no guarantee of landing at all. In fact, it's all but given that he will not get another defensive coordinator job in the NFL for a while. And I certainly hope I'm wrong. And that's why I pointed to that. Okay? Del Rio should have fired himself if it really came down to what I believe, which is Mark Davis saying, hey, look, you need to make a change. Del Rio said, look, I'll make a change in terms of maybe who calls the shots. You'll have Pagano calling the plays instead of Ken Norton Jr., but I'm not going to fire him. They didn't need to fire him. That wasn't necessary at all. But they did, and It upset the team, and it's upset a lot of people. And it's a side of the Raiders that you wouldn't have seen in the past. Okay? So giving the Raiders a pass now for actions in their history that were positive, saying, oh, it's okay for them to do something bad, is completely wrong. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube.